On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I think in some ways it's the same ideas that attract me about design, that what's happening in pop culture reflects where we are in a certain moment. And I mean, that's true of my interest in art too. I like things that can kind of crystallize what's going on in this moment, what our concerns are, what's happening in the world, what's happening politically. And it's such like a nice kind of nugget of time. I love it. I mean, pop culture is such a broad term. It can be a song, it can be, some silly hat that everybody's wearing or whatever. But it reflects so much more than that, and I think that's what I enjoy about it.
Lila Allen is managing editor of Metropolis Magazine, a monthly magazine about architecture and design. She has written extensively about art, design, and popular culture in publications ranging from Architectural Record to Kinder Journal. Lila served as an assistant creative manager at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and as public programs coordinator at the Bechtler Museum of Modern Art. She is a former editor-in-chief of Charlotte Viewpoint, a civic and cultural magazine exploring metropolitan ideas and art. She is a recipient of the 2016 Monotype Award for Excellence in Design Criticism and the Paula Rhodes Memorial Award. In this episode, we explore editing a magazine, elements of good design, making the world better, and living and working in New York City. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Lila, welcome.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Let's begin by talking about Metropolis Magazine. How do you describe it?
Well, we were founded in 1981, originally as a magazine that just covered New York City. We were founded by a man named Horace Havemeyer, and Horace eventually expanded the magazine to cover other areas as well. And we cover design at all scales, from products to interiors to architecture and urbanism. We focus a lot on North American design in particular. That's kind of our area of expertise. And we tell not only stories about what's coming to market and some of the big ideas in design, but also production stories and how products came to be.
What would I find in the magazine?
You would find some shorter pieces on exhibitions, books, new products, profiles of up-and-coming designers. We do love to profile new talents, as we call them. People under 40 that are making it happen and doing cool stuff. Then we'll also have longer features and reviews, and some big themes that we look at are sustainability and accessibility. We look at design all around the world, even though we do focus on North America. So we look at some of the big ideas that drive architecture and design and look at how they're being achieved, basically.
Lila, does Metropolis Magazine have an editorial point of view?
I think we do have a point of view in that we're always trying to push the industry forward. We are a trade magazine, so our readership is designers and architects. It's 50-50, split between those two. So we're always trying to think about what a designer wants to read. They want to see what's new in the industry. They want to get, again, the big ideas of what's driving design today and see how they can apply to their own work.
What does the magazine want to do in the world?
I mean, I think that we are trying to make the world better. We're trying to make design better. We're trying to take the temperature of where things are now and where they're headed. And we're also trying to make sure that designers have a voice and that issues that they're seeing are being flagged and being talked about and being worked out, that the work that they're putting into products is being seen, that the production stories are getting told, and kind of connecting ideas between products, interiors, and buildings and cities.
I do want to talk about good design and what would make the world better. But first, I want to talk about the work that you do. You are the managing editor of the magazine. What does a managing editor do?
I try to facilitate work for my colleagues. So that might mean arranging the production calendar and managing the freelancers that come in and help us with issue close. It might mean helping editors schedule their pieces and basically making sure that the left hand is talking to the right, that editorial is communicating with the art team, that assets are rolling in at a steady rate, that fires are being put out when fires need to be put out. And they also help the editor-in-chief kind of with some of the longer-term planning and make sure that he's supported in what he needs and that plans are workable, and helping him make schedules and plan for the future.
What do you like about what you do?
I like that I am able to help other people who are good at what they do that more. So whether that's writing or editing or being out in the field and talking to designers or designing themselves, that I'm making that process run a little bit more smoothly for them. Seeing a well-done final project, I can't tell you how great it feels after working on a story endlessly in Microsoft Word or on Google Docs, actually seeing it in a layout with pictures. It just comes to life. It's amazing. I love that feeling. And I do love hearing from other people too. I mean, I kind of live on feedback from others to a certain extent. I get a lot of joy from that and a lot of validation out of knowing that other people are reading and thinking about what I've said or what one of the writers that is working for us has said.
Lila, you mentioned good design and making the world a better place. What is good design?
I think that depends who you ask. Different people have defined it different ways over the years. A number of designers and writers have tried to define good design. One famous one was Dieter Rams, who was an industrial designer. His way of thinking kind of went on to influence Johnny Ive at Apple and kind of that really streamlined, intuitive type of design that Apple is well known for. He said good design was innovative and useful, aesthetic, understandable, and unobtrusive, honest, long-lasting, thorough down to the last detail, environmentally friendly, and as little design as possible. So design shouldn't get in the way of itself or be overly clever. I think a lot of these really hold through to today and are accurate to what a lot of people would consider as good design. But again, I think it depends who you ask, which of these is more important than the other. So, I think to me, good design is something that not only looks good and feels good, but also isn't damaging the world or making it worse. It should be something that you can hang on to for a long time, that doesn't lose its appeal, or that if it does, that it can somehow be adapted to appeal to you later on. To me, that's something that is important in good design. I think good design always should respond to its context, which of course involves doing your homework. Where is a building or a product going to be used, and what are the people like that are going to be using it? What is the experience going to be like for people that are servicing that project or building? And what's going into that project or building? What does that production process look like? Is it sustainable? Is it ethical? All of those are questions that you have to weigh. And I think that's one of the things I really like about design is that it's not just a finished product. It's really kind of a whole ecosystem that is informed by the period it's made in, the technology, the people making it. All of that kind of comes together in one single item.
Lila, does the magazine look critically at the topics that it covers?
Yes, I would say so. We do try to look critically at everything that we cover. We also do want the design community to be as good as it can be. And I think a part of that is giving useful criticism at times.
The editorial selection process inherently is critical because you're deciding what to cover and what not to cover, and you're making a decision as to whether it's good.
Exactly. I mean, the fact that a piece is in the magazine itself is an act of criticism.
What qualifies the editorial team to make that judgment?
For one thing, we see a lot of it. And we also, we really do immerse ourselves in the world of design. We attend a lot of events. We read a lot. I think all of us are well educated and have some background in design. We might not be trained designers, although a few of us are. A few of us are trained architects. But all of us have been to school for some form of design. For me, it was design criticism. For others, it might be urban design. For others, like I said, in architecture. We do have one person who's a purebred journalist, too, who comes from the writing world, but has really educated herself over the years about what goes into making a building and has totally thrown herself into it and honestly is as qualified to write about it as anybody.
We can think of distinct periods of design, Art Deco, Bauhaus, mid-century modern. Here we are overlooking Manhattan in 2018. Is there a prevailing school of design today?
I think what all of those periods of design have in common is that, and that's still true today, is that all of them are informed by the technology of their era and advances that are made both in manufacturing technologies and also in material technology. So today, we're really seeing the product of what computers have made possible, both in form and also in experience. So for example, in product design, we're seeing a lot of smart devices in the office. So a chair that records how long you're in it, different devices that record which meeting rooms are used when, that allow people to assess how space is being used in an office. So I think that that's a huge thing in design right now, is both data and also form making through technology. Also, of course, 3D printing is also going to have a huge impact, and we're starting to see pavilions and bridges that are built with 3D printers. The other side of design that we don't really talk about so much in Metropolis is algorithm design. That's a huge thing right now and something that we should all be paying attention to. Algorithms are determining what information you get. I mean, this is, a non-physical form of design. It's a digital or user experience kind of design, but it has real life and real world impacts.
Lila, the name of the magazine is Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
It's in bold letters. What does the word metropolis connote to you?
I mean, of course, I immediately personally think of a city, but also everything that city includes. So how it's laid out, who's living where, what the buildings consist of, what resources people have access to. I think all of that plays into Metropolis. And we do tend to focus on urban centers.
New York City is the defining American metropolis. Are there other cities that you can think of that are getting the idea of a metropolis right?
Ooh, so we just did a whole issue on this exact topic. We published our cities issue in just last month, actually, and it covers cities that we defined as powerhouses, also cities that we defined as inspirational, and cities that we called buzzing, or kind of that punch above their weight. But fortunately, we didn't have to make the calls on what those cities were. We actually sent out surveys to 80 different designers that we've worked with over the last couple of years and asked them to pick them for us. And then based on those answers, we went and did some research on what were the cool stories in those cities.
What are those cities that are well designed?
There's a whole bunch of them listed, but among them, there's some kind of obvious candidates. One being New York, London, Seoul, Tokyo are all covered. But then we also had cities like Lisbon and Oslo and Melbourne and Portland. All of those have interesting things going on. And so you'll have to check out our July-August issue to get more information on that.
What urban design trends are particularly exciting to you?
One thing that's exciting for me is, I don't know that I want to use the term guerrilla urbanism. I mean, things that I like to see in the urban environment are kind of temporary solutions that can come in, things that might be a movable set of furniture that can be rearranged by the people that live in the city to kind of make different seating arrangements, or let people be able to bring a group into a park and have a class, or have a reading group or something like that. I like to see solutions like that are kind of more temporary and movable, and rather than big infrastructure being put in that's permanent and that might have a longer impact on a neighborhood. Like the High Line is a great project, but it's also notorious for having gentrified Chelsea tremendously and made it very unaffordable to a lot of people that previously lived there. So sometimes with these big solutions that are put in, they can be amazing, but they can also have a long-term impact too. And I know that for the High Line, they've actually done a lot of work on when other cities use this, kind of keeping that in mind.
Lila, I'd like to talk about you and your life. You grew up in Charlotte. What was your childhood like?
I grew up with a family that was very interested in art. My parents loved taking me to museums and going to see art shows and going to galleries, and they put me in art classes very young, and I loved them. I also had a very creative grandmother who painted and did crafts all the time and always did those with me. So that's kind of the biggest thing that stands out. Also loved hiking and going up to the Blue Ridge Mountains and spending time up there. I was happy, always creative, and went to summer camp every year.
You have a brother?
Yes. Cannon. I'm 3.5 years older than him. He lives in San Francisco now and does financial wizardry of some kind that I can't explain. But he's a math guy. He studied math and linguistics, so he's the smarty pants of the family. He went to Chapel Hill, and he's married to a woman who is very involved in the culinary scene out there, which is a lot of fun to go visit.
What are your early memories of your mom and dad?
My mom and dad were a lot of fun as parents. They were not buttoned up, to say the least. Definitely went to parties, had friends over, and I loved that. I loved kind of getting to see the human side of my parents. They're also very encouraging and sweet, and I am very grateful to have grown up with them.
Lila, you were in the International Baccalaureate program at Myers Park High School. Who were you in high school?
Very similar to how I am now, actually. I was a person that, at Myers Park, all the social groups at lunch sit under different trees. And I was the person who went between trees. I would spend one day at one tree and one day at another tree. I've always been kind of uncomfortable with putting myself in a certain box. And so I try to go between those boxes. So I was still into the arts in high school. I did IB art with Lin Wu, who I think still teaches there and who I've kept in touch with a bit over the years and seen around, which is kind of fun. And actually, I still had the same best friend who lives here with me now in New York. Her name is Leah. And she moved to New York a few years ago and has made it so much fun for me to be here. And it's been nice kind of reuniting with her after a few years apart.
How would Leah have described you in high school?
I think she would agree with my assessment, honestly. I think she too kind of went in between friend groups, and that's one of the things that I love about her. She probably would talk about my sense of humor, and I would talk about hers. We both are a little kooky and have an eclectic set of interests and tastes and a good appreciation of kitsch.
Lila, you went to Davidson College, and you majored in art history and had a concentration in gender studies. What did Davidson teach you?
Davidson honestly has taught me the power of networking. Truly. Because since I graduated from there, so much of what I have done has been because of the people I knew at Davidson or people that went to Davidson that I had a connection with. And it was just a bond that you immediately have with somebody if they went there, which I think is true of a lot of small liberal arts schools. But my job with Charlotte Viewpoint happened because of Davidson, because I ran into a fellow alum at an event downtown. It was actually the unveiling of the Firebird. And she said, "Hey, you should write for this magazine I'm working for right now, and I'll email you about it." And she put me in touch with you, and that kind of launched my career as a writer, really. So none of that would have happened if not for this person that I didn't even know really when I was at Davidson. It was just somebody that I'd seen in classes. And that's kind of the power of that. The reason that I found my grad program was through a Davidson alum, Anna Marie Smith, who moved to New York and told me she was doing this program. And I said, oh my God, that sounds really cool. And ended up going to some lectures and totally fell in love with this design, research, writing, and criticism program, and ended up applying myself. So Davidson's definitely shaped the course for me, in my career.
While you were in college, you were editor-in-chief of Libertas Magazine and art and fiction editor for Hobart Park, the college's annual literary review. What do you remember about those days?
Staying up very, very, very late and sleeping on the sofa in the editorial office. It was so much fun. I was fortunate that a lot of my friends did those publications too. And honestly, that's probably how I got the position. But it was just a good time. And I think when you're having a good time, sometimes that's like when you get the most creative ideas. And so we had the freedom to really experiment and have fun with it, which I really appreciated. We would put out issues. We did one that was themed after, it was cat fancy themed. So it was a Libertas issue that modeled itself after Cat Fancy magazine, which I don't know if you know, but is the magazine for breeders of cats. But it was just a lot of fun, and we had the freedom to kind of explore ideas, good and bad, and kind of learn lessons from those as we went.
When you graduated Davidson, what were your aspirations?
To work in a museum, which I did. And that was kind of all I knew at the time. I knew I was ready to be out of school for a while, didn't want to go to grad school right away, needed a break, and wanted to work in the arts somehow. I wasn't sure how. Of course, I was thinking maybe curator, but I don't really know what a curator actually does. And I fortunately ended up in programming, doing events, educational events for adults at the Bechtler. So that meant tours and also a film series that I think they still do now on architecture and film. And tours actually, I think, were very important to me as a writer because it taught me how to communicate to people that might know nothing about a subject, and the importance of making sure that you're clear, making sure you're communicating well, making sure that it's interesting and funny. And all of that was actually very important to me developing as a writer.
Lila, you did become editor-in-chief of Charlotte Viewpoint.
I did.
And the tagline of Charlotte Viewpoint was Metropolitan Ideas and Art. What do you remember about Charlotte Viewpoint?
Oh my gosh. That was such a learning experience for me as an editor, and I'm very grateful to have had that time. And really getting to work with some amazing people. Working with you was great. You put me in touch with a lot of other really cool people in Charlotte who were movers and shakers and making stuff happen. Jeff Jackson is like a force of nature, and I still stay in touch with him a little bit. When he's come up and done readings here, I try to catch them because he's just amazing. Also taught me how to work with different types of people, and it made me a more sensitive editor, I think, dealing with a lot of different types of writers, people from different backgrounds, people who might not be professional writers by day, and kind of learning about that process. It also taught me a lot about multitasking because it was something I did in addition to kind of a job during the day. So I learned about time management, and that interest in kind of pursuing something beyond my day job has really continued through the years too. I've always kept myself pretty busy.
You probably also learned to appreciate the difference between those organizations that had sustainable business models and those that didn't.
But it was, yeah, but it was a really good experience for me, and obviously kind of launched me on this track.
In 2012, you left Charlotte and moved to New York. What drew you to New York?
It was wanting to work in the arts and wanting to have more opportunity than I could see at that point in Charlotte. And it's definitely grown a lot, but it was more or less the same several organizations. And if I made a move, I kind of could see what those moves would be. And while they were appealing and great, and I love Charlotte and my family was there, I was ready for something bigger and more unknown. I also loved New York and would come here every year growing up and just totally fell in love with the city and wanted to have the chance to live here.
There's a mythology about being young and living in New York. What's the reality of the experience of trying to make your way in this city?
I was pretty lucky because I got a job the day I moved here and then got a job with nice benefits 6 months after that. My then boyfriend, now husband, moved here with a job that had benefits. And so I feel like I didn't have to hack it as much as a lot of my friends did. A lot of my friends were working several jobs, waiting tables, pulling shots at the coffee shop, whatever, and trying to find a job at the same time. And that's hard. It's really hard. But I think the reality of living here is that you live smaller in a lot of ways. You live at home in a smaller way. You have less stuff. You think a lot harder about what you're going to bring into your home because you don't have much room to work with. You run errands every day rather than doing the big trip to Target or Trader Joe's once a week, or at least that's how I do it. It's never fun buying kitty litter. Just, walking around with heavy stuff, you've got to be strategic. I think you can always spot who lives in New York by who's carrying around a big tote bag. It makes it pretty easy to spot who lives here because everybody is going to 2 or 3 places after work.
What do you love about the city?
I love the different kinds of people that I'm around every day. Riding the subway, as upsetting as it can be at times when the AC is out or when you're having to deal with a crazy person or anything like that, it can also be a really amazing place for humanity. And I think New Yorkers get a bad rep. I think New Yorkers are actually just very efficient and very respectful of other people's space and privacy. And it comes across as being kind of brusque. But there are really beautiful moments here almost every day that I get to see. And I love that. I love the access I have to museums, amazing food, and amazing food that isn't expensive. I mean, you can get a bagel for less than $1 and it's going to be like the best thing you've ever had. I love all of that. And you still have access to the mountains, to the beaches, everything like that. And there's just a million different versions of New York that you can be in. And it's cool to get to experience at least some of them. There's also history everywhere and kind of looking into, oh my gosh, like this is where that record album was shot, or, oh, this was where Boss Tweed had his headquarters or whatever. You pass these things every day and it's turned into a 7-Eleven or something, but it's cool to kind of know what was there before.
Do you think of yourself as a New Yorker?
I don't. I mean, when I'm on vacation in another city and I see my New York tendencies come out, then I think of myself as a New Yorker. But when I'm in New York, I don't. I feel like New Yorkers are the people that grew up here and the rest of us are just visiting. But that's actually not really correct because New York is mostly people from other places. And that's one of the things that makes the city so cool.
Lila, you became assistant creative manager at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. What did you do at the Met?
So I worked in the merchandise department. In case you didn't know it, the Met is enormous. I think it has about 2,000 employees. So it was the biggest organization I had ever worked for and still have ever worked for. And the Met has its own merchandise wing that at the time they developed in-house. And they had a whole staff of product developers that would develop textiles or sculptures or stationery from the museum's collection. So it might be adapting a William Morris pattern to a stationery set or a scarf, or it might be reproducing a bust, from the classical wing. And I worked on the mail order catalog. So for me, that was great because it was print production, which is a dying art, but someone's still got to do it. And it taught me really about print editorial practices and print production practices, going through all the different rounds of proofs, taught me about color correction and photography, organizing for a photo shoot. Yeah, so basically I had a job kind of similar to what I do now, but for the catalog that was being produced for the Met.
Lila, in 2016, you graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York with a master's degree in design research, writing, and criticism. What was your thesis?
My thesis was about the design of children's domestic environments, which is a fancy way of saying bedrooms or playrooms. And looking at how those spaces are shaped by the parents' own experiences and their own anxieties. It was a short MA. It was only a year-long program. So I wasn't able to go into real children's rooms to do a study, because that opens up a whole can of worms. What kind of children are you looking at? And are you looking at different income levels? Are you looking at different ethnicities? Are you looking at different geographic locations? All of that. If this were a PhD, it'd be a different story. But for this program, I looked at the design of children's rooms in sitcoms and in catalogs, since that was my background. And also, I did look at one real nursery here in New York City, and that was a crisis nursery where if parents are having an emergency, they can let their children stay at this facility for up to 2 weeks, no questions asked. If the parent needs to give birth or attend rehab or is going to be in jail or is having some kind of emergency and needs caretaking for the child and may not have family nearby, they can send the children to this space.
What is it that you asserted in your thesis?
Basically, that these spaces were shaped by the anxieties in the parent's life. So, for example, in Blackish, I looked at Rainbow, the mother, which, by the way, Blackish is, I think, one of the best shows on TV, like, in the last 10 years for sure. The mother, Rainbow, played by one of my favorite actresses, is a surgeon and also is this total perfectionist in her own home and is constantly striving to have the most amazing table arrangement and to raise her kids mindfully and to do yoga and do all of these things and still have this like amazing career. And I looked at how those anxieties as a parent shaped the design of her twins' room, which is divided in two, one side for the boy, one side for the girl. Each has its own set of patterns and props and toys and things that indicate the children's interest. And I actually called the production designer and interviewed her. I assumed that she had assumed in designing this set that Rainbow would hire a decorator. And she's like, no. Rainbow would have decorated the room herself. So as a designer, she had to think about the character's motivations and think about how that character would design this room. So anyway, you see certain things come through, like there being an abundance of props related to being intellectual and curious for the girl and being kind of goofy and sporty for the boy, but also that there was a kind of tit for tat, that there was one of each for each child and that they were treated exactly equally in the design because Rainbow wouldn't want to give favor to either child. Also that the room was shaped in such a manner that children couldn't move the furniture around, that things were out of reach. So that implies that they have an adult available to them for help during the day, that they have those resources. Whereas at the crisis nursery, it was modular, lightweight furniture that could be moved around easily. The toys were in baskets on the floor where the kids could get to them themselves because they're being taken care of by a small group of adults and there are lots of kids there and the kids are given agency, and it's also more effective for the caretaker too to have things arranged in that way.
Lila, if a child's room expresses the anxieties and hopes of the parent, if you had a child, what would your child's room look like?
I'm sure. I can't even think about this yet because I'm sure the reality of it would be totally different. But, I'm sure that I wouldn't pick an ugly crib. And also probably I would pick some crib that was compostable or was an antique from my family that then I would probably have to find storage for somewhere, and maybe a crib that my mom kind of guilted me into taking out of her attic. That's probably the reality of it.
Lila, in your thesis, you explored the concept of zaniness. What do you mean by zaniness?
So the definition I used in my thesis for zaniness was from Sian Nagai, because she works at either Princeton or Harvard, and she wrote a book called Our Aesthetic Categories that came out a few years ago. And she looked at a few different aesthetic qualities like cuteness and zaniness. And she defined zaniness as a constant striving for and kind of the sense of there never being enough. And so you're constantly working and toiling and trying to make this thing happen to comedic effect. So if you think about Lucy Ricardo on the line in the factory trying to get through all the chocolates in time, and it goes so fast that she has to stuff them in her mouth. That's a great example of zaniness.
I'd like to run an idea by you. Design and zaniness go together. Design brings order to zaniness, and zaniness propels design forward.
I think that that's a really good reading, actually, and an interesting concept for me to consider. But I think also design can launch zaniness if it's not done correctly, or if it's done poorly.
Do you see those two qualities, zaniness and design, in you?
I think there's a little bit of both. It's a yin and a yang. I think in my job, I'm more on the design side. I'm constantly trying to kind of rein in the zaniness and just make it manageable and break it down into smaller chunks and make sure everything's on schedule. But I just came back from vacation and people were saying, what do you have planned? And I said, I save all my organizational energy for work. When it comes to vacation, it is no plans. I let my husband do all the work. I go there and I kind of like to play it by ear and kind of shoot from the hip.
Lila, you are a fan of pop culture.
Oh, yes.
What is it about pop culture that attracts you?
I think in some ways it's the same ideas that attract me about design, that what's happening in pop culture reflects where we are in a certain moment. And I mean, that's true of my interest in art too. I like things that can kind of crystallize what's going on in this moment, what our concerns are, what's happening in the world, what's happening politically. And it's such like a nice kind of nugget of time. I love it. I mean, pop culture is such a broad term. It can be a song. It can be, some silly hat that everybody's wearing or whatever. But it reflects so much more than that. And I think that's what I enjoy about it.
Lila, what magazines do you read?
Well, of course, I read a lot of design magazines, some online, some in print. But on my own, I love New York Times Magazine. I think that they have creative and fascinating stories that are well told, and it's obvious that a tremendous amount of research and work goes into all of those pieces. I love New York Magazine for kind of more pithy and obviously kind of pithy stories, but also stories that are very relevant to my interests as a New Yorker. And New York Magazine also has Jerry Saltz in it, and he's my favorite. He's one of my favorites. He actually reminds me a little bit of Philip Larimore, and I don't know how Philip would feel about that.
If you were to launch a magazine of your own, what would it be?
I've always kind of felt that I'm a better supporter of someone with a strong vision and kind of helping that person realize their goals and also kind of provide feedback to that person. But on my own, the kinds of stories that I would want to pursue are, some of them definitely would be design. Some of it probably would be pop culture and reviews, but things that, again, kind of reflect where we are and that tell stories about something that's bigger than the thing itself.
Lila, I'd like to end on a more personal note. I know your dad recently passed away. What did your father mean to you?
I was totally a daddy's girl, and I miss my dad a lot. He was not only my dad, but he was a good friend. And actually this week, I was thinking about my dad a lot because my car got hit. I was like, God, I wish I could call my dad and ask him what to do. Like, he was always the guy in high school. If I wrecked my car or something, like, I would call him because I was too scared to call my mom. My dad was the less scary parent growing up. But what he meant to me, he was funny. He was socially very generous. He would talk to anybody. He was never too good to talk to anybody. He had hilarious stories all the time and could always find the story in anything. And actually, he's a lot like my brother, which I've been pointing out to my brother every time I see him because my brother doesn't see it at all. And almost every story my brother tells me, I'm like, oh my God, you're just like Dad. Like, you absorbed his personality completely. My dad was not a planner, not an organizer. That was my mom's side of things. So I think I take after my mom a lot more, but I try to channel my dad when I can because he just, I don't know, he was always kind of like a comforting presence in my life. If I had a problem or was emotional, he was the one I would call. And I call my mom too. She's also wonderful for this. And has been so generous and loving. But yeah, I would say that I love to kind of call him and just see what he was up to, what crazy person he'd met that week, or all that.
You probably can still call him.
I'd probably get a voicemail that would like make me break down in tears.
Lila, you are 31 years old.
Yes.
You are a senior writer and managing editor of an internationally known magazine and multimedia platform reporting on architecture and design and what you love. What do you make of all that?
Well, when you put it like that, it sounds pretty good. But I don't know. This is really where I am now is actually kind of the logical point that everything else has led to. My writing with Charlotte Viewpoint and at the Bechtler, I did some writing there as well. The organizing I did at the Bechtler, the project management I did at the Met, and kind of the editorial processes there. What I learned at SVA, all of these things kind of pointed in this direction. So it's totally logical to me that I'm here now. And I'm very happy to be here. It's a really great place to be, and I'm learning a ton every day.
Where do you go from here?
I have no idea, and I've never had any idea. I just I follow opportunity, and I keep an open mind. I meet lots of people. I stay interested in lots of things, and so I don't know. We'll see what happens from here, but I don't think I'm going to make a move for a little while. I've only been here since November, so things are good.
Thanks for your time today, Lila.
Of course. Thank you, Mark.
Lila Allen is managing editor of Metropolis Magazine. She earned a BA in art history from Davidson College and an MA in design research, writing, and criticism from the School of Visual Arts. And now, a personal word. Lila Allen and I recorded our conversation in a conference room in the offices of Metropolis Magazine on the 17th floor of 205 Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, across from the New York Design Center and blocks away from the Chrysler Building. I had walked across town from my hotel on 10th Avenue and 42nd Street. Along the way, I had taken in the city, Broadway between 42nd and 34th Street, Herald Square, the Empire State Building, 5th Avenue, then Park Avenue, then Madison Avenue, until I arrived at Lexington. Lila greeted me when I arrived in her office. Pages from the next issue of Metropolis Magazine were pinned on bulletin boards. Writers and editors were huddled around workstations. Covers from past issues of the magazine were neatly framed. How cool, I thought. I first met Lila in Charlotte in 2009, a few months after she had graduated from Davidson College. She was 22 years old. I was 46 years old. I was publisher of Charlotte Viewpoint, a web-based magazine about metropolitan ideas and art. We published interviews, articles, poems, op-eds, photographs, and reviews about the civic and cultural life of the Charlotte region. Lila submitted a work of first-person fiction called In the Crosshairs. The work was smart and literary and compelling to read, and that's exactly how Lila came across in person. Smart, literary, compelling, and far more savvy about art theory and pop culture than I ever could be. Her next piece was one I had requested about Lady Gaga. She entitled it Fame Monsters, Why We're Goo Goo for Gaga Puffs. That was in February 2010. That month, she accepted my request to become editor-in-chief of Charlotte Viewpoint magazine. Charlotte Viewpoint reached its creative peak under her leadership. Lila led a team of talented and dedicated editors, writers, and designers, including Jeff Jackson, Michael Solander, Alex Gregor, Elise Anderson, Casey Bruton, Carolee Bartol, and Chris Curriton. She edited the work of accomplished freelance writers, including Philip Larimore and Amanda Pagliarini. She wrote her own column every month. She helped produce Typeface, a live magazine on stage at the Visual Light Theater in collaboration with Charlotte Magazine, and helped market Topograph, New Writings from the Carolinas and the Landscape Beyond, a literary anthology edited by Jeff Jackson, published by Novello Press. Lila also helped lead a complete rebranding of Charlotte Viewpoint and the launch of an entirely new website. She worked closely with me as publisher and executive director of the underlying nonprofit organization. She met with the board and presented to prospective funding partners. She got all of this work done at night and on weekends, or found time during the day while working full-time at the Bechtler Museum of Modern Art. Our vision at Charlotte Viewpoint was to represent the best of what metropolitan ideas and art could be. We wanted to have influence and impact. We wanted to show ambition and meet our promises. Lila embodied our ideals. In June 2011, after 15 months of serving as editor-in-chief, Lila asked if we could meet for coffee. She gave notice that she was moving on. Within a year, Lila moved to New York. I remember receiving a call from the Metropolitan Museum of Art asking about Lila. I told them they couldn't hire a better person. The woman on the phone said that Lila had made such a good first impression, they had decided to hire Lila on the spot, but they hadn't told Lila yet. I let Lila know an offer was on its way. I had all those memories in mind when I met Lila at Metropolis Magazine. Her name is on the masthead of a preeminent thought leadership media platform. Her work is defining design and architecture across the world. Her life and career are a perfect progression of metropolitan ideas and art. How cool is that? This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.